Housing market has taken a major turn. Like everything else, at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the mall, housing prices are soaring too. But insult to injury, mortgage rates are way up. And since there's a supply shortage, it's just getting worse and worse.
Let's touch on the housing sector now, where for the first time since April, mortgage rates have fallen below 5%, down considerably.
Housing prices continuing to hit record highs, but sales are continuing to slide. Those two things don't seem to make logical sense. Can you explain what's going on?
Hey, we are back.
Thanks for having me back.
3-month update time.
Can't believe it's been 3 months already.
It's gone by fast. Well, last time we had this discussion, things were all doom and gloom. So are things still doom and gloom?
I am starting to become more optimistic, but for different reasons.
What are those reasons?
Well, I think the housing market is still completely screwed.
Okay.
And I'm talking about single family rentals specifically. I think multifamily will be more able to weather the storm because multifamily can historically absorb those changes. But I believe we're just starting to see cap rates starting to move in the same direction as interest rates. So I think the unknown and the scary part, if you will, is how much that's going to happen.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see how, obviously, less people that can afford to buy means more people renting, means, multifamily will typically do okay during these types of downward markets. So it will be interesting to see how that all shakes out as rates continue to rise. So
because the housing itself is completely unaffordable at this point.
Completely.
It's nearly doubled for mortgage payments, as the interest rates have nearly doubled.
It was at what, below 3 at the bottom?
You could get sub 3 mortgages at that point. Now, I think it peaked above 6 and then quickly retraced as everybody said, the Fed's going to create this big recession. And
so, but we're recording this at the end of January. It's
January.
July 25th, and I think the Fed is planning on meeting this week, and they, everyone's pointing to potentially them raising the rates another 100 basis points. So things are going to, I think, based on inflation data, they have to do something. They can't not raise rates, right?
They say they have to do something, and they absolutely will. There's nobody saying that they're going to go slower. But obviously, inflation-related data that the Fed relies on is always lagging. So they have this delicate balance.
Same with housing data. Everything is all types of data.
Well, permit starts are leading, but other metrics are lagging. And just in general, if you read the news enough, you can hear what the tone of the market is. Certain markets are slowing, certain markets are staying the same, not too many, but you get that general impression of sort of how does it feel. So the consumer sentiment, which has nothing to do with inflation, is dropping, it's plummeting. Home builder sentiment is plummeting. And those are definitely leading indicators, but I don't know if they're necessarily accurate or you can rely on them completely. But
you're seeing it starting to affect lumber futures have been dropping,
which is good for us,
which is good for people that are building or going to be building now.
Yes.
But you're starting to see kind of all of these trickle down effects start to occur based on market data.
Right. To be clear, the Fed is very intentionally doing this, and the results are starting to occur as they'd like. Once housing prices start to go down, that can take some pressure off of inflation. But that's for home purchases. Rents, on the other hand, have not seen that. We've also just started. It's like you said, end of July, August, September. Those are real big times for leases to turn over. And everybody knows that rents have been going up and lease renewal rates have been going up. So there's going to be more pressure on inflation there. The question is, if the Fed knows that and expects it, is that going to influence their decision, or are they going to say, well, that was a one-time thing, and so now we need to look forward?
Well, let's not, forget housing in general. What about just the cost of goods? What about the cost of eggs, or the cost of chicken? Everything is expensive. So it's not just the effect inflation has on on housing and rentals. It's how inflation affects just everyday living.
Right.
And then when is that even going to come down at some point?
One word, energy. Energy needs to get under control.
Yeah.
And we saw oil spike at what, 130 a barrel, and as of today it's below 100. So, as it kind of does that up and down dance, it's finding its equilibrium. I think policy decisions of cutting off new supplies of oil, whether you like that or not, is a reason why it has happened, and the war and all these other things that we've talked about that are out there.
Yeah.
But energy influences everything. I mean, our bill for a dumpster, there's a fuel surcharge because they're paying a lot more to come to the same property and do the same work. So I guess it's nice that they're adding it as a surcharge rather than just upping our rate, because when the prices come back down, I would expect that to fall off, and that's a conversation to have. And the products where that's not happening are going to be way more abundant than a simple dumpster company.
Yeah. Yeah. So in general, I think that where we're headed, I think it's going to be interesting for the next year or two. I think that depending on what happens with the interest rates, which we all think they're going to go up, it will be interesting to see what happens to for sale development and across the country. I think certain markets will be able to weather the storm. I think a lot of markets that, like the Northeast, where policy or zoning is very restrictive and you already have such a supply shortage, I think that's the biggest driver right now for keeping things propped up, is the lack of supply.
I like how you say propped up, because it really kind of is, right? You create your own supply shortage.
You create your own issues, right? So
we bitch about it, can't build anything new. And in fact, we've talked about it so many times, even if the floodgates are opened, right? That doesn't actually help us, because now we're competing with so many other new units coming online. So it will push prices down, which in turn will cause selling prices on the acquisition to go lower.
Correct.
So these aren't like topics, or us saying we need more loose zoning and we need more supply. That's not like something that benefits us.
Yeah.
It helps keep a steady supply of jobs and some predictability, but I mean, it's not like we're getting richer.
As there's more supply and demand goes down, prices, you hope, will either stabilize or also go down. So again, it's not a huge benefit to us, but it helps the overall population, because if it makes it you end up just doing more volume, because at least you can build things quicker, and overall costs to build will go down, hopefully. So that will help in the long run.
There's still the labor shortage, though, which is the other problem.
That's the other problem. I mean, there's just so many issues in the entire building process. It's just the life cycle is just riddled with issues.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever do 3D printed homes? I see that a lot on certain social media.
I don't know.
It's think it works here.
It's not there yet. I mean, they're kind of weird looking to me. I think they're weird looking.
I think it's hard to get over mentally, similar to modular homes, which I could kind of get more behind than a 3D printed house.
I agree. Modular's come a long way, but I think the technology obviously will just keep getting better. But I don't see how you can do 3D printed homes in urban markets. It's impossible. I think if you're doing like subdivisions and homes in the suburbs, I think 3D printed homes are could be a significant benefit to home building. But again, I think the suburban model is just flawed to begin with.
What do you mean?
I just think that I think the suburban markets they're such an energy suck, and you have to be car dependent, and the public transportation to get from these suburban markets to these higher density areas where the jobs are there's a lot. I don't know how to say it.
What are you trying to say?
There's a significant lack of public transportation to get from point A to point B. So everyone's reliant on cars in the suburbs. And I think that model's broken. If you look at Europe, Europe is built around public transportation, and they try to incentivize people to use either public transportation or ride bikes and wean off of the car and not use the car as much as possible. And I feel that it's the opposite here. Like, we developed the suburbs for cars.
Right. Or put another way, we push back. There's a lot of that NIMBYism on the public transit expansion. And one argument would be, well, you're not doing a good job with the system you have currently, which is unfortunately true here in Boston, and other cities do have issues or have not expanded, but they should. Some people don't want density. And to that, I say, well, then you're in the wrong place.
Well, I mean, density is going to solve the problem, the housing problem. So you either got to get behind it, or you got to figure out where you really want to live, right? I mean, it sounds shitty for me to say that, but it's the reality.
Well, listen,
as the rates go up, housing is going to become more unaffordable for a lot of people that want to buy, because the cost of borrowing is going up.
But if you have no buyers, again, this is demand destruction 101. If you have no buyers, then prices will have to come down.
Yeah.
And you're in that point very similar to how people view the stock market, right? Like, oh, I still have hope that I'll sell, or I still have hope that the stock market will go back up. You're in that, like, I don't want to believe it phase. I forget what it's called in their scale, but you still have to come to acceptance yet that you're in this phase. And
there's always a lag on the seller's side also, right? So
when they started their endeavor, and rightfully so, right? They started their endeavor projecting X price and buying at X price based on, you bought at your entry price based on your exit price. But now if all of a sudden the exit price looks like it's falling and you have to sell for a loss, or you don't have funds to cover the difference, like, what do? You just sit on your hands, kind of, and that's where I think some of these developers are going to start to get weeded out.
Right. I'm more talking about more single family sellers, like just general, But yes, developers. It will be interesting to see what happens with developers over the next year. I think I said it 3 months ago in the meeting or in our discussion, but I think if you're a developer and you are just breaking ground on a project or for sale project, or you're in the middle of a for sale project and you're not going to finish it until sometime next year, I think that you could potentially run into some problems depending on what ends up happening. But there's no signs that point that the Fed's going to lower rates anytime soon.
Right. And that further pushes a little bit more of that last like hurrah of buyers, because again, now we're talking about 75 basis points or 100. Which way do you think it's going to go, by the way?
100.
You think it's going 100? Yeah. I was leaning that way too. Something still tells me 75 in my gut, because I don't think they want to go crazy, but we'll see.
What's 25 basis points at the end of the day?
I don't know. Anyway, there's still that last little mini rush of people who are like, I got to get in before this decision's made.
You're seeing the scramble. You're starting to see the scramble of buyers that don't want to lose out on something, and they know that if they keep waiting, they're not going to be able to afford something. So that now is the time they want to buy. And I think that's like you said, the last push on kind of this little bubble. But you're already seeing significant slowdowns across the country. I think areas like Florida and Texas and the Northeast, where again, the Northeast more so because of the zoning restrictions and the lack of housing. But I think Florida now versus 2008, 2009, back then, Florida was mostly transient. It was significantly, housing was more swayed towards tourism. I think back then,
a little more speculative.
A little bit, what?
A little more speculative.
A little more speculative. They thought all the baby boomers were going to start to retire down there. And what ended up happening was all the baby boomers' retirement funds got destroyed because of the stock market. And so they couldn't afford to move down there. And there's not a lot. But now you have a lot of businesses that have moved down there. So I think that's the biggest difference now, a decade later, more than a decade later, where you have a huge base of industry there now. And so that's where you're seeing the big influx of people that want to move there because of tax benefits, et cetera. So I think that's helping Florida and those types of states stay propped up, or could stay propped up for a little while longer here. I mean, ultimately, regardless of how recession proof these areas are, if rates keep going up, you're going to see an impact regardless.
Right. Yeah, I think it's obviously intentional. So it's designed to do this, and prices have to come down to adjust.
Well, what about the big R, the big R, the recession? Do you think this will ultimately lead to some type of recession?
If you asked me that 3 months ago, I'd say yes, which you did. And hopefully I did say yes. Otherwise, I'm just making a fool of myself. But I don't know yet. And I think, to your point about housing in different areas holding up differently, like Texas, Austin, number of listings has like doubled or tripled, active listings. So I would say that those are big states, and different areas have held up better than others. I would say in Florida, Miami is a surprising location. I don't know about all of the other major metro areas, but in general, I think that a recession is certainly likely, but it's not here. And something that I was sharing with you yesterday was an article about just how it is defined. And it's not necessarily what everybody keeps talking about, which is this GDP number, 2 negative quarters of GDP. There are other factors that get taken into account. So, I don't think we're there yet. The job market is holding us up, just like the housing market held up the COVID recession, if you will.
Yep.
And jobs, you have to have job losses, net job losses, in order for recessions to start, or that's typically how they are let in.
Unemployment's like at an all-time low.
It is. And there's still more than 2 jobs for every 1 available worker.
You are starting to see some of these tech companies that, again, I think interest rates have a huge impact on the tech sector, because you're seeing, now that the cost of borrowing isn't basically almost nothing, right, you're seeing a lot of these tech companies that were valued at these astronomical prices, they're starting to either go belly up, or you're starting to see layoffs happen because they can't get the funding because the cost of borrowing is going up.
Right.
So you're starting to see a trickle-down effect on that one particular sector.
Exactly.
But other sectors like pharma and lab, like those things are still exploding because of COVID and everything that's happening. So, and I think that's where areas like Boston will help, because Boston has such varying degree of industry here, where if one industry kind of takes a beating, the others can kind of help prop it up. And it did that in the last recession. But, it will be interesting to see how, obviously increased borrowing costs across the board will have an effect on jobs. And while people might not be laying off, they might stop hiring.
Right.
So it will definitely be interesting. I mean, you're seeing a lot of all these the crypto crash, right? Like the crypto industry was destroyed over the last couple months. And you're seeing a lot of these crypto companies, these crypto tech companies go out of business, like is it Celsius or a couple of these other big ones are going out.
It's not surprising, because this is why folks like Bill Gates have said, it's I forget the expression he used, but basically it's the bigger fool theory is what he said. So it only works as long as there's somebody else willing to pay more than what you paid. And I think parts of crypto are extremely helpful and have potential. I just think you compare it back to, Web 1.0. We're nowhere close to seeing its potential, and something will come out of it, I'm sure. But I think that in the meantime,
it's more of like the 2000 kind of tech boom, right?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, that's a fair comparison. I think that was the transition between Web 1 to Web 2.
Oh, was it?
Because it was like you go to Yahoo and it was just literally add my website. Like that was a manual thing. They didn't even have, I think they just started having spiders crawling, and that's when Google really started making a splash. But my point is that crypto is in a very similar, ask Jeeves. Crypto's in a very similar position. And unfortunately, the difference between crypto and Web 1.0 is that you couldn't just start scamming people left and right. Everybody's got the internet now. Back then, no one did. And all of these shit coins, as you call them, or meme coins, or whatever they are, those are where crypto is getting a black eye right now.
Well, just like back then with the tech tech boom, there needs to be a massive consolidation in the market.
That and regulation. And unfortunately, nobody likes the word regulation, but this was the Wild West. I mean, anybody could start a coin, people throw money into it. Yeah, but that activity is not happening anymore. You can't just make a coin and then people go into it. I mean, look at the things that we've looked at, like just Top Shots in NBA, NFL, NFTs based on those things. I mean, just that has peaked. It was like the Beanie Babies all over again. So we'll see. We'll see if those come back.
My mom still has hers.
Remember Pogs and like the Pokemon cards are still
I loved Pogs.
popular.
I think I still have some of mine.
I would never get the real stuff. I'd always get like the knockoff brand from my parents.
Well,
what's that tell you?
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah. No, I did the same thing with my kids.
So yeah, I mean, so what do you think is going to happen in the next 3 months? Should we do another 3-month update? Should we just do this every 3 months?
It's up to you. It's not really up to you. It's up to you. Do you want to keep hearing us chat about this? And if you want to hear us talk about specific things, just I guess let us know in the comments, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We'll give you our opinion.
I think that as rates continue to rise, I think the market's going to continue to soften. I don't know how much yet. It's very market specific. I think
you're not going to be able to say, paint a broad brush and be like, this is a problem everywhere. No. You can't.
But the markets that ultimately have very restrictive zoning and already have a huge supply shortage, I think will be okay. I think you might see a little bit of flattening. I think you aren't going to have, lines down the street at open houses and things might sit for longer, but you will ultimately have buyers out there. Like for instance, like we put a condo on the market 2 weeks ago and didn't have much traffic. We had a decent amount of traffic the first weekend, but didn't have any offers, but we just received a full price offer 2 weeks in to the listing. So things are still selling, they're just taking longer to sell.
Right.
And there are buyers out there. It's just a matter of waiting. And this is what the market was. People don't remember. This is how the market used to be.
Right.
It wasn't.
You don't put it on and get an offer the same day or before it even has an open house. That's
people
not normal.
Are so used to having bidding wars and like 12 offers after the first weekend and like offer deadlines. Like it never used to be like this. Like things took 60 to 90 days to sell in the past.
The 05 to 07 time period it did, but once the market fell out there, it was over. We just don't want to repeat that nonsense.
No, we don't. But I think people just obviously quickly forget.
Yeah.
And things have been in such an upward trajectory for so long that people just have expectations. And again, that's why I said earlier, it always takes longer for sellers to catch up. There's always a lag in when buyers change their whole buying mentality based on market trends or conditions, but it takes a while for sellers to catch up.
Right.
So you're kind of starting to see that now, and that's why you're starting to see things stay on the market for longer, or you're starting to see a lot more inventory out there. So again, I think areas that have a ton of building going on, I think we'll see the biggest effect, and I think that the housing market as a whole will cool down.
Yeah, and I would say pay attention to local wage data as well if you can, because there are certain markets where real wages, which are the wages adjusted for inflation, are going up, and places where it's going down. In fact, the top two states I think are New Hampshire and Florida. So Florida, as we were discussing this morning, is probably because a lot of financial firms moved down there, so they have a lot more ability to absorb some of these price changes. Not everybody, of course, but there's that resiliency factor. And then there's other areas where it's just not going to happen. Or as people start returning to the office, all these random remote places that people move to, like in Idaho, it was Boise, I think, that they saw this crazy increase, and now they're going to be possibly on the forefront of this huge exodus. And I'm sure the locals will be happy, but fairly annoyed for that 2 to 3 year period. But just everything is so market specific.
Yep.
But high level, I think we may hit a recession. If you exclude COVID, we haven't had one in forever.
Correct.
Not saying that we want one or need one.
I don't think you can count COVID because it was forced.
It was an external factor. It had nothing.
You
I
had
mean, we
no-
were slowly looking at rates kind of where they are now.
They were starting to
right?
tick
They
up.
were in the 4s and 5s.
Yeah.
So we were already here. And like you said, people forget. We were so addicted to that, cheap 2 to 3% interest rate. Now we're back to where we were in 19.
Free money.
Right. Now we're back to where we were in 2019. And all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. But terrible impression of a general buyer. Anyway.
Well, anyway, we hope you enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Let us know if there's any other future videos or topics you'd like us to cover. And we'll see if we want to do another one of these every 3 months or not. We'll see where we're at in 3 months. Hopefully, we're not filing for bankruptcy.
we should post a comment who wins the 75 or 100 basis points bet.
All right.
I'll take
all right.
75. You take the 100.
100. All right.
All
Where do
right.
you think? 100 basis points or 75? Let us know in the comments below. Later.